Buon pomeriggio.
Good afternoon, everybody. I formally open the parliamentary meeting preparatory to COP26. First of all, I wish to address my greetings to the President of the Italian Republic, Sergio Mattarella, who I thank for having honored this meeting with his presence. I also wish to greet the President of the Senate of the Republic, Elisabetta ALBERTI CASELLATI, the President of the International Parliamentary Union, Duarte PACHECO, and the President of the Italian group at the Inter-Parliamentary Union, Pier Ferdinando CASINI. I would like to greet the Italian Foreign Minister, Luigi Di Maio, who will be talking to us about global ambitions to combat climate change. I also wish to address a special thanks to Professor Giorgio PARISI, who last Tuesday was awarded the Nobel Prize for Physics 2021. Together with Sukuro Manabe and Klaus Hasselmann, and who has accepted to take part in our opening ceremony. It will be a great honor to listen to him, also in view of his ongoing commitment to combat climate change. Finally, a very warm welcome to all the delegates who are attending our meeting today. The participation of such a large number of members of parliaments from more than 75 countries from all over the world bears witness to the great attention for the issues concerning the future of the planet. In addition to the delegates, we have many presidents of parliamentary assemblies who yesterday and today have attended the proceedings of the P20 presidents meeting. We decided to organize these two meetings in close conjunction so that we can make the best use of the presence of these representatives. Such a broad participation shows the great will we have to return to an in-presence discussing, looking at each other's directly and discussing great global issues after the time we have been kept apart by the pandemic. I hope that I can interpret everybody's feelings by hoping that this emergency will soon be definitively behind us. Each of us has to do what we can to make safety and health one of our most overriding concerns. This is something which we can do also by guaranteeing health controls and preventative measures which allow us to hold this event in full safety. I thank you all for having understood the reasons for this effort on our part and for having cooperated fully in the success of this event. This meeting of ours is part of the partnership between Italy and the United Kingdom in organizing the 26th Conference of the United Nations on Climate. As you know, the government conference will be held in Glasgow from the 1st to the 12th of November. Italy, a few days ago, has already organized two important preparatory meetings, the Youth for Climate meeting dedicated to the young and the Milan Pre-Cop. For many years now, conferences on climate issues have been accompanied by a parliamentary dimension which sees MPs from the countries which are signatories to the climate agreement meeting. Together with the Inter-Parliamentary Union and the Parliament of the United Kingdom, I wish to thank the Speaker of the House of Lords and the Speaker of the House of Commons of the United Kingdom also for having accepted to moderate two important sessions at our meeting. We decided therefore to divide the input of parliaments to defining the goals of the climate conference in two parts. Therefore, we have the organization of a first part of the preparatory meeting here in Rome, which will lead to the adoption of a draft document, then to be put to the final approval of a second parliamentary meeting to be held in Glasgow. We consider that this type of organization ensures the broadest possible parliamentary participation and allows us to follow better the final weeks of the difficult negotiation underway. I believe that the input of parliaments is essential in order to achieve the goals of combating climate change. This because parliaments can exercise the requisite political pressure on the executive branch in order to encourage them to pursue climate policies which live up to the scope of the challenges before us today. Also, as representatives of all citizens, they are the best link to involve people directly in the choices which affect them. We are before undeferrable choices, decisions which in the short term may lead to economic and also social costs, but these are certainly less than the benefits which derive from the passage to a sustainable growth model. As the Secretary General of the United Nations, Antonio Guterres, said recently, the world is on a catastrophic path towards 2.7 degrees of global warming. If we do not reverse this path, we will not just jeopardize the environment of our planet, but we'll also be undermining the very foundations of our democratic systems. We cannot win the battle to stop climate change with occasional and sectoral measures. We have to move towards a full-fledged model, sustainable model. This is the only way to ensure lasting and equitable well-being to the future generations. And we can do this only looking to the problem with a global outlook, where we have true coordination between the efforts adopted in various parts of the world. This is a hugely complex goal, considering how different our production systems are, as well as our social conditions and the degree of growth of the countries which have signed the Paris Agreement. But it is a challenge we need to accept together, strengthening multilateral negotiation forums, financial instruments for environmental measures, and the integration between the various policies which can impact this area. Pope Francis has recently said that we need to walk new paths in order to overcome the emergency poverty and to place care for common goods at the center of national and international policies. We will be able further to explore the teachings of the Holy Father when we are received by him in the Vatican tomorrow morning. I'm convinced that all men and women of goodwill, whatever their political, cultural, and ideological or religious positions, must and should converge on certain shared objectives which are essential in order to protect our common home. These goals have to be transformed into practical commitments. We need to reconvert our industrial system and resort to clean and low-cost energy sources, and we have to ensure the possibility of sustainable and lasting development. Each country has to do its part in achieving these common goals. Italy is ready to do its share. We will be, in the future years, undertaking the major investments which have been launched by the European Union as part of the Next Generation EU program, which has been endowed with 750 billion euros. According to this plan, each state will allocate 37% of the overall endowment it receives to green transition. Italy, in its national recovery plan, has allocated 40% of the resources assigned to it to this goal. In order to coordinate public policies, recently, for the first time, a Ministry for Environmental Transition has been established. The minister will be speaking at this conference. And recently, an important amendment to the Italian constitution has been proposed, which inserts in among the fundamental principles of our republic the protection and stewardship of the environment, biodiversity and ecosystems, also in the interest of future generations, and establishes that private economic initiative cannot be undertaken in any way such as to cause damage to health and the environment. In light of this major commitment to environmental policies, we decided to organize this parliamentary meeting in Rome, giving a particularly effective significance to our partnership with our British friends. We have organized this meeting so as to open a broad and open discussion where the delegates of all parliaments will be able to express their opinions and share their national experience in the field of combating climate change. I'm sure that this exchange will lead to decisive elements to give momentum to the international negotiations underway in view of the Glasgow conference. I wish you all a very fruitful meeting. I now give the floor to the President of the Italian Senate, Maria Alberta Casellati. President of the Republic of Italy, President FICO, President PELOSI, President PACHECO, Minister Di MAIO, and President CASINI, and President Timmermans. Dear colleagues, it is a great pleasure and a great honor to be part of the opening session of the Parliamentary Day Pre-Cop26 hosted by the Italian Parliament. In welcoming you to Rome, I wish to convey the greetings of the Italian Senate and our best wishes for a productive meeting. We are on the eve of an essential meeting for global climate policies at the coming COP26 in Glasgow, which, as you know, will be chaired by the UK in partnership with Italy. A number of essential points to safeguard the planet will be discussed. Only with an effective application of the historic Paris Agreement in 2015 will we be able to attain the goals which the entire international community has set itself, namely to keep, by the end of the century, the warming of the Earth well below 2 degrees Celsius. We know, however, that science, also in the report of the UN Intergovernmental Panel, which was presented in August, has asked political decision makers to be even more ambitious in their actions and to contain this increase within 1.5 degrees Celsius. These may seem just to be numbers, but in fact, on these numbers, the future of our planet and of the new generation hinges. The breakage of environmental balance caused by harmful emissions and damaging human activities can lead to devastating consequences, not just for our natural landscape and biodiversity, but also for the socio-economic balance inside countries and among countries, forced migration, water scarcity and crisis, unemployment, radicalization of conflicts, as well as extreme weather events and natural disasters are among the possible side effects of climate change. The cost of remaining inactive would be much higher than that of any strategy and plan aimed at combating global warming. Our young people ask us to act forcefully all over the world, seeing hundreds of thousands of boys and girls on the streets clamoring to protect the climate with all their enthusiasm, creativity, and their naivete at times has warmed our hearts. And I think it is very important that Italy, a few days ago in Milan, in the presence of the President of the Italian Republic, Mattarella, and the President and the Italian Prime Minister Draghi, hosted the first edition of a major international forum on climate change, which was attended by youth delegations from all over the world. At that forum, which we can consider the Young People's COP, a strong voice emerged asking governments, parliaments, and international organizations to take speedy action for our climate. We owe a proper answer to these young people. It is no coincidence that the G20 under Italian presidency has decided to attribute a priority to the climate issue, to the P of people, in the health crisis of COVID. We have seen the P of prosperity to promote economic and social recovery after the pandemic. We also have to consider the P of planet in order to protect the life of our globe and to combine economic growth and social well-being with nature as part of a great strategy for the future, which is the 2030 Agenda of the UN for Sustainable Development. These three Ps, we decided to add a 4P, the P of Parliament, with the organization of a summit of speakers of G20 parliaments, which we hosted in the Italian Senate, just a few hundred meters from this hall, which ended this morning. At the final declaration of the P20 summit, which we have just adopted and which we will present to the heads of state and government at the G20 in Rome, a significant part is devoted to climate change. Legislative assemblies may have an essential function in two directions. On the one hand, to promote and support international dialogue and cooperation. Secondly, to translate into national and local measures global climate strategies. I had the feeling that within the international parliamentary scene there is a general awareness of this topic and that it is increasingly necessary to activate and reinforce multilateral mechanisms to achieve our common goals. We are aware that there are differences in approach and differences in understanding of the policies to be adopted, in particular between the most significant group of nations and groups of nations, but parliaments have jointly asked for our ambition to be elevated. Combating climate change, we need to say clearly, is not a sectoral action, but it is something which touches on many areas: the economy, production, society, and our cultures. And this is something which requires common joint action. We cannot simply aim at mitigating climate-changing emissions through new production, consumption, and energy supply models, but it also has to be targeted to adaptation measures to the consequences of global warming, in particular in developing countries. And in order to make this process effective, we are convinced, as we said in the P20 declaration, that it is urgent and necessary to fully mobilize the financial resources which have been earmarked. If the goal is common, the ways to achieve it are a great many. And it is because of this that the architecture of the Paris Agreement is based on the progress towards NDCs, national determined contributions, within the respect of differences and national responsibilities. Allow me to mention in this context the contribution Europe is making. The European Union has set itself the target of becoming climate neutral by 2050 and to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by at least 55% by 2030. This thanks to a range of measures, including the strengthening of renewable energy and sustainable transportation, which can truly be a spur to increase our ambition on climate matters. A guiding role, therefore, has been taken by the European Union in environmental transition. Beyond its initial costs, this will be able to bring huge benefits to our economies and our employment in future. Let us hope that this will be of encouragement to the entire international community, starting from the G20 countries, which are alone responsible of 75% of global emissions. For my country, which fully recognizes itself in European goals, it is of fundamental importance to pursue this approach, because Italy is a wonderful country from an environmental, natural, and landscape point of view too, but with a fragile ecosystem, and therefore it needs to be protected in every possible way. I would like to conclude by mentioning a sign which was spotted in a youth demonstration for the climate during school hours in Rome. This sign said, "We've skipped our lesson to teach you a lesson." And I hope that this comes over in the translation. And let us all therefore listen to the lesson our young people are giving us, and let us do something to save their futures. Thank you, and I wish you a very positive meeting.
Ha facoltà di intervenire il Presidente.
Now give the floor to the President of the Inter-Parliamentary Union, Duarte PACHECO.
Thank you. Mr. President of the Republic Italian, President Mattarella, thank you so much for your presence in our meeting. You are a reference to all Democrats. And now you are here with a house full of parliamentarians that represents democracy all over the world. Welcome, Mr. President. Honorable President Roberto FICO, Honorable President Elisabetta CASELLATI, Honorable President Ferdinando CASINI of the Italian delegation to the IPU, and allow me to say, Honorary President of IPU. I learned a lot with you, Mr. CASINI, honorable speakers and members of parliament, especially friends. On behalf of the IPU, I am honored to welcome you all to this Pre-Cop26 parliamentary meeting, one co-organization of the IPU and the Italian Chamber of Deputies. Allow me to say thank you to the President CASELLATI and the President FICO for all, not just all, because you did a lot, personal commitment during the organization of this event and to obtain success to it. Thank you so much. We feel at home, especially because you insist in the organization, and we are here to make a reciprocation of your commitment to this agenda. Thank you. Of course, dear friends, I need to give a special word to the keynote speakers in this session. Professor Giorgio PARISI, your presence here and your contribution is very important for the IPU. It means that science and politics should be together, work side by side, hand on hand, to fight climate change and minimize its consequences. Congratulations, Professor Parisi. You received the phone call that I believe all of us wish to receive one day. But just the genius will receive it. Congratulations, Professor. Minister Luigi Di Maio, thank you for your presence as well. The collaboration of the government of Italy with parliamentarians yesterday with the President of the Prime Minister, Mario Draghi, and today with yours, show how the relations between the two pillars of power should be. We need each other, and only work together, governments and parliaments, will it be possible to overcome difficulties and to build a better world. Thank you again for your presence. Honourable Madame Nancy Pelosi, your participation in this meeting is very important to the IPU. It reinforces the ties and knowledge between the House of Representatives of the United States of America and IPU. But also, it means the reaffirmation by the US of the value of multilateralism and the importance given by the new administration to the matter of climate change, something that we know is in your personal agenda for a long time. Thank you also for your presence. Dear friends, the COVID-19 pandemic has been a warning shot with regard to the much greater challenge arising for climate change, forcing nations to rethink their economies and their national priorities. The challenge posed by this sanitary crisis are urgent and important, but they need to be transformed into opportunities for building resilience for healthy people and a healthy planet. The recently launched report by the International Panel on Climate Change has spoken loud and clear. Human role in the climate crisis is real, and the 1.5 target is slipping beyond reach. The clock is ticking, and there is a need to take urgent action to avoid an irreversible crisis. Immediate, rapid and large-scale cuts to greenhouse gas emissions are essential to maintain the goals set by the Paris Agreement, and parliamentarians have a critical role to play in ensuring its implementation through their legislative, budgetary, oversight and representation functions. Parliaments can make a turn in climate action now, supporting the translation of the commitments made under the Paris Agreement into national level action. This is where it counts. With their distinctive legislative mandates, parliamentarians are instrumental in ensuring coherence among global commitments and national legislation. But parliamentarians, it means we can also ensure adequate funding is allocated in supporting climate action and ensure oversight on the government's actions to address the climate emergency. Dear friends, we do not need new laws. We need to work and to ensure that governments will do what they should. It is also our duty to ensure this action from our all governments because people and the world are tired of words, declarations and compromises without concrete change and action. For the IPU, supporting parliaments and parliamentarians in their efforts to take climate change in action is a top priority. By promoting bilateral and regional and international parliamentary engagement, the IPU facilitates the exchange of good practice and lessons learned on addressing the climate emergency. A resolution was approved by unanimity at 141st IPU Assembly in 2019, urging all parties to implement the Paris Agreement. In 2021, another resolution endorsed parliamentary strategies to strengthen peace and security, acknowledging the concrete and existential danger to humanity caused by climate change, as it was affirmed yesterday by the Pope Francis. Furthermore, the declaration of the Fifth World Conference of Speakers of Parliament that happened last September, a few weeks ago, reiterated the critical importance of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change and the actions and targets set out in the Paris Agreement, expressing a strong support for an ambitious and collaborative outcome from the COP26 in Glasgow next month. Our meeting today and tomorrow is an important milestone on the journey towards ever bolder parliamentary action on climate change. We will discuss how it is possible to have a sustainable recovery of our economy from the crisis caused by the COVID-19 pandemic. But we will do more. We will try to understand how is the real situation of the negotiations inside the process of COP26. Also, how to found global policies for climate. And finally, what should be our role of parliaments to achieve COP26 goals. The COP26, dear friends, is a chance not to be missed in the fight of climate change, and it must deliver in providing solutions from a global and long-term perspective, including addressing the issue of financing. The IPU, together with members' parliaments, continue to provide a platform to ensure a parliamentary dimension of climate negotiations. So, I look forward to the fruitful dialogue that will take place during this event and hope our discussions inspire stronger parliamentary action on climate change for a more sustainable and peaceful planet. There is no more time to lose, dear friends and colleagues. Please, action is important and right now. We need it right now. Please, do it. Thank you so much.
Ha facoltà.
The Chair recognized the President of the Italian Group at the Inter-Parliamentary Union, Honorary President of the IPU, Pier Ferdinando Casini. Thank you, President. In addressing a respectful greeting to the President of the Italian Republic, Sergio Mattarella, and expressing my great pleasure for the presence here of the Nobel laureate, Professor PARISI, I'd like to first of all address my thanks to the President of the Italian Senate and you, the President of the Chamber of Deputies, for the enthusiasm and the intelligence with which you both have worked for the organization of this event and have planned it and followed it throughout many difficult times. This has not been simple. This is perhaps the first in-presence event of this size which has been held for a long time, and the IPU is particularly glad of this. The United Nations agency in the field of world meteorology, the WMO, has defined the economic cost which the international community has faced because of climate change and environmental disasters as follows. In the last 50 years, losses have been equal to at least $3.6 trillion. A cyclone in the Gulf of Bengal has caused $13 billion in damage, whereas the recent floods in China and India had a cost equivalent to $32 and $10 billion. Obviously, these figures deserve to be checked, but the estimate is truly alarming, and this is not the only thing. The accounts are even worse when we come to human lives lost. A study conducted by scientists on the Lancet totals the deaths caused every year due to climate change in 5 million. To this we have the martyrs for the defense of the earth and the environment. Just think of the battles of the indigenous peoples in Brazil against the deforestation of the Amazon basin. So combating climate change obviously cannot be restricted to one country. It is a global challenge for the whole world. The Pre-Cop meeting in Milan a few days ago, held in preparation of COP26 next month in Glasgow, has confirmed the worrying facts highlighted in the recent intergovernmental group of the United Nations on climate change. The changes before us are unprecedented in the last few hundreds of thousands of years. Many run the risk of being irreversible or to require thousands of years to be reversed. According to this report, global warming beyond 1.5 degrees Celsius shall be something which we will not be able to avoid unless we undertake truly drastic immediate measures, and containing warming could become something which is beyond our power. If these are very scary figures, particularly if we think that warming around the poles is almost double than in its effect than in other parts of the planet, with clearly visible consequences on rising seas because of the melting of ice caps. In this connection, next December in London, an assembly of members of Parliament of the Antarctic region on the Antarctic will be held. I'm saying this to my friend President PACHECO. At every inter-parliamentary session, we record concern by our colleagues in Parliament from small island states. The melting of ice packs and glaciers in the Arctic and the Antarctic would not only threaten these islands, but also cities like Venice, Bangkok, and Shanghai. Remaining and considering again the colder areas of the planet, there's another fact to be considered. The melting of pack ice has led to new possibilities in maritime transport, which is open seas, which previously were closed. This is a geopolitical issue of great importance. The general scenario of trade would be completely different, so much so that this leads us to ask ourselves whether it would be possible to continue to plan trade routes as we know them today. So the impact of climate change corresponds clearly to many problems, such as the growth of migratory flows. It's not difficult to imagine the effects of large-scale migration boosted by modern knowledge tools and the acceleration of historical processes. Our societies may not be able to withstand such great stress generated. So today's event is particularly important because it is addressed to members of parliament, and it obviously involves governments too, and therefore the presence of our foreign minister is very important. It's particularly important for the young. As the fine event held last week in Milan shows, it is from them that the decisive momentum to bring about the changes needed must come, and it is for them that the religious leaders meeting in the Vatican signed a ecumenical document a few days ago with an appeal to political leaders. Multilateralism is the key to move forward constructively, and never perhaps than this year. COP is loaded with great expectations. Glasgow may represent a milestone and a quantum leap forward in the respect of the environment and a concrete commitment on the part of all. Thank you. Let's now move on to contributions on the topic global ambitions to counter climate change. I give the floor to Mr. Giorgio, Professor Giorgio PARISI, who's the 2021 Physics Nobel Prize laureate. Thank you, President. President of the Republic, President of the Chamber of Deputies, President of the Senate, and authorities, members of parliament from all over the world. For me, it is a great honor and a pleasure to take the floor. Humanity has to undertake basic changes. It has to counter climate change forcefully. For decades, scientists have been telling us that human behavior is laying the basis for a great increase in temperature. Unfortunately, measures taken by governments have been insufficient, and the results so far have been inadequate. In recent times, the effects of climate change are before the eyes of all, as Mr. CASINI said. Floods, hurricanes, heat waves, and devastating wildfires, which we have all looked on with astonishment. These are just a small taste of what will happen on a much greater scale. Now, we're beginning to see perhaps some more decisive action, but we have the need for much more forceful action. Experience with COVID has shown that it's not easy to undertake timely, effective measures. Often, measures to contain the pandemic were taken too late, or at a time when they were no longer deferrable. We all know that a doctor who has too kind to his patient can make things worse for them. You have to be strict doctors, and you have to help humanity to walk through a minefield. Science can be a beacon, but the responsibility of not veering from the right path is something which the drivers and the leaders have to do. Scientists do not know everything, and knowledge in science is built up with a difficulty one step at a time, and we eliminate gradually areas of ignorance. Science is something which is built up slowly and with great commitment. When it is predicted that the temperature could increase by 2 to 2.5 degrees, this is what we can estimate on the basis of our best knowledge today. However, it must be clear to all that the accuracy of climate models has been tested by comparing them with the previous predictions. If temperature increases by more than 2 degrees, we're entering an unknown land where there may be other events which have not been foreseen, which might worsen the situation greatly. For example, colossal forest fires, as in the Amazon, would emit huge and catastrophic amounts of greenhouse gas. The increase of temperature is not something which is due only to direct emissions, but it's also mitigated by many mechanisms which might stop working if there is an increase in temperature, whereas the limit below 2 degrees is something which we can be quite clear about. It's very difficult to understand what would happen in more pessimistic scenarios. Things might be much, much worse than what we can predict. We have before us a huge problem which requires decisive action, not just in order to stem greenhouse gas emissions, but also with scientific investment. We have to develop new technology in order to conserve initiative, transforming it into fuel, non-polluting technologies based on renewables. Not only must we save ourselves from the greenhouse effect, but we also have to avoid falling into the trap of exhausting natural resources. Energy saving is also something which we need to address with energy, with decision. Is, for example, if we keep the temperatures in our homes constant all the year round, it will be difficult to stop global warming. We need a huge effort on the part of all, and something which has a colossal cost, not just financially, but also socially, with changes which will have an effect on our lives. Politics must ensure that these changes and these costs are acceptable to all. Those who've used more resources must contribute most, so as to have the lowest possible impact on the majority of the population. Costs have to be distributed fairly and on a basis of solidarity among countries. The countries which have the greatest impact currently on the resources of the planet must make the biggest investment in energy. The GDP of countries underpins decisions, and the intention of governments seem to be to increase their GDPs with no end in sight. But this is something which contrasts with the needs to combat climate change. I would like to endorse some words which Robert Kennedy spoke in May 1968 at the University of Kansas. GDP also includes air pollution and tobacco advertising, and it also involves special locks for our doors and the prison expenses for those who break them. It means what is spent to cut down sequoia trees and the cost to repair the damage we cause. It measures everything apart from what measures and makes life worth living. And we can say anything about America apart from the fact that we are proud to be Americans. The GDP, as we've heard in these words, spoken 53 years ago, is not a good yardstick for the economy. It captures the quantity but not the quality of growth. Many other indices have been proposed including the Sustainable Growth Index and the Well-being Index. If GDP remains center stage to our attention today, our future will be very sad. All those who plan our future must use an index which considers other aspects alongside GDP. Blocking climate change is something which will keep humankind busy for many generations. Education is a crucial point. Young people have to be able to understand the general situation and shape their ideas and have to be listened to. We must give children a scientific education starting from kindergarten. But first of all, they have to understand the scientific method to deduct from their experience. Scientific education is a natural process and cannot be acquired by just listening words, but through experience in the environment, so as to reach a clear vision which is necessary to understand the future of human society. But often science is not taught in this way. The future belongs to the young, who must have all the instruments to allow them to find their way in this complex world. So I've only touched on many, many issues: energy, scientific research, social justice, economy, and education of the young. Dealing with these issues and solving them is your responsibility, with the input of all, in particular the young. Thank you. Now I'd like to call the Speaker of the House of Representatives of the United States, Nancy Pelosi, who I would like to warmly welcome to the House, the Chamber of Deputies.
On behalf of the United States Congress, it is my privilege to join parliamentary leaders for this meeting in advance of the 2021 United Nations Climate Change Conference in Glasgow. How important is that meeting in Glasgow? How important is this subject? So important that the President of the Italian Republic is with us to listen, as George has cautioned us all to listen, as he listened a few days ago in Milan to young people, as he's listened to so many about this important subject. It's an honor to be with you, President Mattarella, always. And also with gratitude to Speaker Roberto FICO and Senate President CASELLATI for bringing us together, not only in terms of the logistics of it all, but in the spirit of their presentations, setting forth clear challenges to us all with great suggestions on how to succeed. President PACHECO, thank you for your leadership of the Inter-Parliamentary Union, and thank you for the invitation to speak as a guest here today, but more importantly for your ongoing leadership about this very, very important subject. And again to President CASINI for your words of wisdom that you provided and the guidance that you have given President PACHECO, as he acknowledged earlier. But what a thrill and what a surprise to be here with the Nobel laureate, Giorgio. Thank you so much for your words of wisdom, true words of wisdom from a scientist. Science, science, science. The answer to so many challenges, whether it's climate, COVID, or computing, whatever, the answer to so much. Sometimes in Congress they say to us, it's either science or faith. No, that's not a choice. Science is an answer to our prayers, and it's an honor to be with you. Congratulations, and thank you for taking the time to share those words of wisdom. George PARISI, we're in the same room with him. Isn't that exciting? So, as was indicated by Speaker FICO, we are here to talk about global ambitions to counter climate change. Again, it's really very special to be with so many parliamentary leaders gathered here today to discuss the great challenge of our time and our unified response to them. And we have also emphasized earlier in the G20 parliamentary speakers meeting the importance of parliaments, the importance of multilateralism, and the importance of our working together. Now, less than a month from COP26, we must discuss what I believe, and I think we all share the belief, the most urgent challenge of our time, the climate crisis. The climate crisis is an existential threat to our planet. It is a public health priority for water and clean air for our children to breathe. It is an economic priority for good-paying green jobs for now and into the future. It's a national security priority to prevent conflict from migration and the competition for habitat and resources that follows. And it is a moral issue. If you believe as I that this is God's creation, this planet, then it is we have a moral responsibility to be good stewards of it. If you don't share that view, but just we all can agree that we have a moral obligation to transfer this planet into future generations in a responsible way, and that is something we must do for our children and our grandchildren. And we must do so with justice. We must do with justice for the most vulnerable communities among us, including indigenous communities, and I thank you, Mr. President, for your mention of that, which have been hit first and the hardest. In order to do this, we must listen. Listen, as you said, George, Nobel laureate, is that our title, Nobel laureate? Listen to the children. Listen to the indigenous people. Listen, as the President Mattarella has been doing, as also the Prime Minister who was with us yesterday and was with you in Milan, listening to the children. As His Holiness Pope Francis wrote in Laudato Si, the climate is a common good belonging to all and meant for all. He spoke to this priority when he addressed a joint session of Congress in September 2015. That was 6 years ago, a little more than 6 years ago. To protect that common good, Pope Francis said, we need a conversation that includes everyone, since the environmental challenge we are undergoing and its human roots concern and affect us all. Listening again. December 2019, just before the outbreak of COVID, I had the privilege of bringing a diverse congressional delegation to COP25 in Madrid. It was, again, my honor to address the Climate Vulnerable Forum, Partners, Leaders events on action for survival. The vulnerable, whether it's vulnerable nations or vulnerable people. There we heard from those climate vulnerable communities as they sounded an alarm that we would hear even louder this year when the United Nations told the world we have a code red for humanity. Code red for humanity because of the climate crisis. Again, talking about the indigenous people, years before I had led a congressional delegation to Alaska to view the impacts of global warming there, including rising and warming seas, melting of the glaciers. The descriptions have been given over and over again about the challenges. We were told by the indigenous people there at that time that decades before, so that would take us about 50 years back. This was about 12 years ago, so decades before, the indigenous people there were told, told us, their elders told them that decades before, they reported on changes to flora and fauna and habitat. Decades before, like 50 years ago. When they reported this, those elders were told that it was anecdotally interesting, but not scientifically significant. How about that? So again, the world should have listened to them with that urgent call, early warning of indigenous people then. We must listen to them now. We must listen to the indigenous and climate vulnerable peoples both around the world and in our own nations. We are at a moment of great responsibility and therefore great opportunity when it comes to climate. We are at a moment of responsibility because the G20 countries, who have been meeting before this meeting, are the world's biggest polluters and contributors to the climate crisis. We are at a moment of responsibility because of that, but we are also at a moment of opportunity because the G20 countries could, if we act boldly and with unity, mitigate the vast majority of climate change, keeping warming to 1.7 degrees of Celsius. We must do this working together as parliaments with respect and with a plans of action. So when we meet in Glasgow next month, we must bring our highest ambitions to the table. We must not only meet our Paris goals, we must beat them in order to limit warming to 1.5 to 2 degrees of Celsius. Again, parliaments working together. Executive branches as well, but parliaments. At the same time, here's what we're doing in Congress. We have majorities in Congress. We're taking action. In our Congress, the House has established a select committee on the climate crisis, launched the most ambitious climate plan in our history, and passed multiple significant clean energy and conservation bills. Now we're working on the enactment of something that President Biden calls Build Back Better. Better because it would be irresponsible, in our view, to build the same way we had built before. It would be a dereliction of duty for us not to go into the future in a green way. And that responds to the urgency of the climate crisis. It's all about the children. It's all about the future. The planet belongs to them, and they know it. And they are speaking out, and they're acting upon it. And thank you again, Mr. President, and the Prime Minister and others for having that early meeting in Milan for COP26. We need them a world that can be, where they can be healthy, where they can thrive and reach their fulfillment. In the White House, we have a president who, when he was in the Congress, brags about the fact that when he was in the Congress, he was the first to introduce climate legislation in 1986. Now, Al Gore, right in there, so we have a little competition on who was the earliest on all of that, but President Biden feels great authority on this subject, and that's a big change for us, let's put it that way. He said, we stand at the UN last month, he said, we stand, in my view, at an inflection point in history. Our security, our prosperity, and our very freedoms are interconnected, in my view, he said, as never before. And so we must work together as never before. That's what he said. And I say here, this is our mission today as parliamentarians, to work together as never before to advance a better future for our children and for all people, and to recognize the role that parliaments play in all of this and the importance of multilateralism to that extent. And so for that reason, I'm so happy to be with you, and I thank all of you for your commitment and your leadership for the planet, for the children. Thank you.
I would now like to call on the Italian Minister for Foreign Affairs and International Cooperation, Luigi Di Maio. Mr. President of the Republic, Mr. Presidents and Speakers of Parliament, Members of Parliament, Madam Nancy Pelosi, ladies and gentlemen, I wish to thank the Italian Parliament and the International Parliamentary Union for having organized these 2 days of discussion in view of the COP26 in Glasgow. The effects of climate change are before us. They affect all countries in the world. The latest decade has been the hottest on record, and natural disasters have increased fivefold from the 60s. Scientific evidence confirms the serious nature of the situation and the influence of human beings on this. Science must be a reference for citizens, particularly for decision makers. We cannot use technology and ignore science, which is the basis for technology. We learned this from Professor Giorgio PARISI, a Nobel Prize laureate for physics, together with 2 the climatologist, and I wish to greet him with pride and gratitude. We therefore need to change course. We can no longer defer combating climate change. We must act together immediately. Climate problems do not take note of borders between countries. We need global commitment. The re-entry of Washington into the Paris Accords has been a very important political measure. We are sure, Speaker Pelosi, that the United States wants to take up a leading and moving role in global efforts. We also see very favorably the recent ratification of the Paris Accords by Turkey. And it is very important. The role of young people is also fundamental. That's why Italy, in Milan, last week hosted Youth for Climate, the first event in the COP setting, which is totally devoted to the new generations. 400 young people from 15 to 29 from 189 countries asked for greater involvement and called on governments to move towards transition, climate education, and recovery and resilience mechanisms. They emphasized the importance of responsible international tourism, respecting local communities. They've asked for us to do away with fossil fuels by 2030, and that the public and private sector should stop funding them. It is our duty to listen to them and involve them. We need to be able to change our lifestyles. Tomorrow, alongside the G20 meeting on trade in Sorrento, we will be gathering 100 startups and venture capital funds. The event entitled Innovation League will identify projects which can encourage investments in technological innovation, public-private cooperation, and entrepreneurial capabilities among the young. The hope of Italy, as president of the G20 and partner of the United Kingdom in COP26, is that this can be a year for a great change on climate matters, and for us to be able to take the steps for our next decade. People, planet, prosperity, these are the pillars of our G20 agenda. The G20 countries generate 80% of CO2 emissions worldwide. Therefore, we have special responsibility in achieving climate goals. On the 23rd of July, in Naples, the first joint ministerial meeting of the G20 on energy and climate was held. For the first time, we collectively recognized the bond between energy production, emission of greenhouse gases, and climate change, thus stressing that environmental transition should be center stage in environmental policies. A main role also goes to renewable energy to replace fossil fuel. The final communique, which was the result of months of negotiations, stresses the need to keep the increase of global average temperature well below 2 degrees and to continue our efforts to keep it to 1.5 degrees Celsius. And we emphasized incredible opportunities from recent technological innovations in the field of energy production, which leads us to need to develop a plan of action for smart and resilient cities at all levels. These are significant results which lead us to look with greater confidence to the G20 summit in Rome and COP26 in Glasgow. In recent days in Milan, we held a preparatory pre-COP meeting, an important stage to respond to the to collect the preliminary percentage of the main international actors on key issues. The 50 minuters taking part agreed on the need to increase their commitments within the Paris Accord on climate, particularly with regard to decarbonization. It was stated that it was necessary to progressively eliminate support to production of fossil fuels and to move towards investments in renewables. Every country shall do its part based on its own specificities. Our green transition will be more effective if commitments are taken in with a multilateral approach. Major international forums, therefore, are essential events to catalyze our common efforts and to reach common understandings. Our meeting these days represent a fundamental event, as we hope this meeting in Rome will also be, in order to move forward our climate agenda in view of the Glasgow COP meeting. Italy is working strenuously to ensure successful negotiation at every level. The challenge is to transform the climate threat into opportunities. I think of the response we've been able to give to the pandemic. The recovery, which we are beginning, gives us an opportunity to renew our societies in a way which is sustainable and inclusive, together with as the EU partners decided not to miss the opportunity of a green transformation. We have undertaken an emission collective path in this direction based on reforms and investment. The Green New Deal has established for the European Union binding goals for climate neutrality and the reduction of the net emissions by at least 55% by 2030. In addition to this, we have Next Generation EU, which establishes 750 billion euro of resources for environmental transition as one of its pillars. Italy has a national recovery and resilience plan, which is very ambitious, with major investments for green transition, where certainly ecological transition implies costs for citizens and companies. The most advanced countries can increase public investments and use fiscal and monetary policies in order to support this transformation, protecting the social dimension and mitigating negative effects in certain sectors. But not all countries have this possibility, but nobody should be left behind. The mobilization of funds to support low-income countries will be center stage in the coming COP26. We need to make the commitments of the wealthier countries more concrete. In order to mobilize together $100 billion by 2025 to support climate action in developing countries. Africa is only responsible for 3% of global emissions, and yet it is facing the biggest impacts of the crisis, stronger and stronger hurricanes, devastating floods, drought. This is something which Vanessa reminded us in Milan, a young girl from Uganda who spoke for an entire continent, a continent which is very close to our hearts. Currently in Rome, a meeting entitled Meeting with Africa, which is organized to have a discussion with more than 30 African ministers on environmental and climate issues. These are topics which will also be central to the 10th Italy Latin America conference, which will be holding at the Foreign Ministry on the 25th and 26th of October. Combating climate change also means promoting a fairer distribution, not only among generations, but also between regions of the world. Integrating environmental production and economic growth is necessary for successful and lasting policies. The health of our economies is directly connected to the health of the planet. The same goes for our safety and security. Growing desertification and conflict over scarce resources are sources of instability. We are very aware of this as a Mediterranean country. The Mediterranean region is warming 20 times more quickly than the global average. In order to change mechanisms of production and consumption, we have to involve all representative assemblies, governments, experts, young people, international organizations, and civil society. Last Monday in the Vatican, I took part in the event entitled Science and Faith in the presence of the Holy Father and world religious leaders from many religions. The goal was to highlight the contribution which religious communities can make to ecological sustainability, promoting responsibility being taken by every citizen in the world beyond their religious beliefs. Parliaments, which represent citizens, will have a growing role in guiding environmental policies, but also translating principles and goals into law. By exercising your functions of legislation and oversight, you will contribute to the formation of a new common culture based on greater environmental awareness. This is why this meeting is important. The success of global climate action also hinges on cooperation between parliaments. Thank you, and I wish you a very successful meeting.
With
this, we come to the end of our opening ceremony. Soon we'll be moving to our first session entitled Green Approaches to COVID-19 Recovery, which will be chaired by the Speaker of the House of Lords.